Nobody's been talking about the economic inequality and this economic violence that's happening all over the city all the time until someone lights a cop car on fire, and then there's a tension there.
I'm proud of what we've done in Baltimore. I don't condone the violence and the destruction of property. However, if that's what it takes to unite and motivate people, then so be it. It's a small sacrifice.
I was once told, if pressure can bend an iron pipe, what do you think it does to the mind?
It didn't just happen yesterday or 2 weeks ago. This has been a question for years now.
People think of Baltimore and they think of The Wire. You know, I think of Baltimore and I think of Frederick Douglass.
People in Baltimore are tired of just sitting idle, waiting for change to happen, so we're going to make change happen ourselves, whether it's through breaking the curfew, civil disobedience, or daily protests. Whatever it is, we're going to do it.
We have to move this from a moment to a movement. You know, a lot of us who've been doing activism over the years, we have been waiting for this. And I don't mean waiting for this in this, we're waiting for another black man's life to be taken, to be disregarded as worthless. We have been waiting for this country, this city to wake up.
Baltimore, site of the latest uprising against systemic racism. Despite what the media's been saying, it's not just about police violence. We spoke to activists on the streets to find out the issues behind the uprising.
The only time you ever really hear about it is when people are actually killed. But there are many people who are harmed by the police regularly. Arms broken, ribs broken, nose broke.
Young people like Michaela Brown have been leaders of this movement.
The first protest pretty much started immediately as people found out about the murder of Freddie Gray. There was a flyer put out for people to come in the community and protest what had happened. So for a week, people organized at the Western Police Department, which is the police department that's responsible for the murder of Freddie Gray. It went from the community to Camden Yards to City Hall, and that's the day that the protest here and the situation here in Baltimore started getting national attention, because there were over 3,000 people in the streets marching for justice for Freddie Gray.
I remember going to the corner store as I think I was maybe 11, 12. I was living here at the time, and the corner store was there, which is now an empty lot.
Michael Coleman is part of United Workers, an organization that's been fighting for economic justice in Baltimore for nearly 15 years.
I remember going there and the police driving up Robert Street and pulling us over. Scared the hell out of us. They pressed us, and to this day I have no idea what that was about. They wouldn't tell us. They made us sit in the gutter, asked us where we were going, what we were doing. It was like where we live, asked our names, and just kind of made a big deal of nothing. We had no weapons. We just go to the store, you know. It happened several times in my lifetime. Those experiences lead me and others to believe we have no reason to trust the police. And every time we see the police, there's a certain anxiousness that come over us. Like, okay, are they going to stop me? What's going to happen after they stop me? That experience stuck with me. It's like, what was the point of all that?
It's not a group of thugs. It's not a group of killers. But you saw a generation that's crying out for justice.
I actually lived in this block in this house that you see behind me. And this is just a quick example of what a lot of Baltimore looks like. The last time I was living here, I was a young teen, and the block was full. Every house was occupied. And now in 2015, every house is unoccupied. And it's not just here, the next block is similar. this whole community is just ravaged.
Housing here in Baltimore is not adequate. A lot of us who live in our housing have slumlords, which means they don't take care of their housing. So one example would be the lead paint and how the city has not forced those slumlords to actually do anything about the amount of lead that are in the houses, because a lot of the infrastructure here is old, which would explain why a lot of the housing has lead paint issues in it. And what people don't know is how badly that affects the people in this neighborhood. For example, my sister had lead poisoning, and it has affected the way that she's able to perform in school.
Why is it that in communities like this in Santa and Winchester, the lifespan difference can be up to 16 years, where in those communities that are disinvested and poor, people die 16 years younger than a community that is not poor and that might be primarily professional or white skin?
I was homeless for 2 years because of pretty much a slumlord. And that's a story that affects a lot of people. A lot of people here are homeless for various reasons. It could be their home collapsed and then they didn't have the funds to get another house because jobs here are also lacking in Baltimore City. My mom hasn't had a job since probably when I was about 8. So it's been a struggle trying to provide for the family, especially when you're the only one working, which would be me. And that's a story that other people face in the community.
The Right to Housing Alliance is fighting for community control over land.
So there's a pretty substantial affordable housing crisis in Baltimore. Over 50% of renting households are what's called housing cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. People's ability to have a job is connected to housing. People's access to health care relies on them having housing. We know that a lot of foreclosure is due to medical debt. Over a quarter of Baltimore residents are paying more than half of their income to housing, leaving a huge burden for them to afford the rest of the expenses they need for basic necessities, for education, for transportation, for food, for health care. Over 30% of our rental housing in Baltimore is considered uninhabitable. It's so substandard. And an additional 30% on top of that has code violations of some kind. We see about 150,000 cases a year going through Baltimore City Rent Court. That's 150,000 times a year someone's unable to pay their rent. We see about 7,000 evictions, rental evictions a year. Maryland is also still almost nearly leading the country in foreclosures.
On this side, we listed the entities who's not helping the city, who caused some of this. I grew up in East Baltimore, and I remember it was a SK factory around us, and people worked at Bethlehem still, and it was happier times. And then all of a sudden, when the big jobs started closing out, the steel mill left. You have companies moving further out. There was no way for them to work. They didn't have nothing to do but stand on corners. You have nothing to do but to drink, to turn to drugs, even though some people may look at that and say, well, that's because you're powerless. But no. Sometimes it just get to you.
What do we want? Justice! And when do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! And when do we want it? Now! When do we want it?
I think they say like 90% African American. If a school system is 90% African American, that's something like hyper segregation. So we're talking about hyper segregation.
Dominique Stevenson is a local community organizer and activist.
When you add the issue of class, you look at some schools, we have what they call the citywide school system here, where young people who score a certain level are able to get into what are deemed the better high schools. These are high schools where you're more likely to be tracked into college. So if you're stuck in a zone, you can be a bright child, but maybe don't score well. You're stuck in a zoned school that is not really good about tracking or getting young people into college, you're pretty much stuck.
A lot of people end up dropping out of high school, right? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, they don't care about their education. No, the reality is we have to provide for our families, or we have to take care of our sick grandparents, or we have children and we can't take them to school, but there's no daycares in schools.
In the county, they teach you about Shakespeare and stuff like that. City schools, unless you go into a super duper program, which is limited, you're not going to learn anything about it. You're not going to learn how opera can help you in your everyday life, you know? Instead of, the only thing you're going to learn is what a gun can get you.
I've had dialogue with people who say, well, if people got better education, then they can get a job. They just go to school and get, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Well, schools don't teach, our schools don't teach the same things as schools in more privileged neighborhoods.
There's this desperate difference. You have the ivory tower, and then right outside the door, you have this complete neglect.
Maricela Gomez organizes in East Baltimore communities facing displacement by Johns Hopkins University.
Hopkins is a prestigious university. I myself came to Baltimore just to participate in that prestigious education. However, it was very quickly that you see all you have to do is come down the street to go into the university, and there's this difference.
It's pretty incredible. Like on the one hand over here and then the one hand over there.
And Hopkins is a really good example of how development has occurred in America. What I tell people is if you look and study Hopkins, you've got it. It's simple. A history of development of an institution from 14 acres to now more than 90 acres. In a period of since 1889 to, where are we, 2015. And the public-private partnership between Hopkins and the city and the state and the federal government, subsidizing, tax incentivizing the development, acquiring land, using laws, government laws like eminent domain and urban renewal to remove people from their land en masse.
You would think, because of the fact that Hopkins is known as like the premier health institution in the United States, or at least, you know, generally in the top 5, that you would not have children born in the 80s who had suffered lead poisoning. You would think that Baltimore would be ahead of the curve simply because of the fact that Hopkins identified it and that we would have prevented this from happening.
You have 40% abandoned building. You have corner liquor stores. You have sirens going all the time. You have drug dealing. You have folks on the corner selling drugs. It's not hard to see that there's this huge gap between one community and the other. You can't have chronic disinvestment of people and not expect that they're going to be vital and participate in the community.
What are the systemic issues that result in a young man being murdered? What are the issues that result in entire blocks to be abandoned, and neglected? What are the issues that continue to breed racism within our police department?
People in the community where Freddie Gray lived, where Freddie Gray died, essentially, people there are still struggling with day-to-day issues.
We want our community to be reinvested in, but we want to be at the table. We want to be decision makers so that we can stay. If you ask us what we want in the community, we can tell you about it. But what happens is people come in and tell people, this is what's best for you. And part of what they feel is best for communities is just bringing in a certain race and class of folks.
I am what democracy looks like. 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 I am what democracy looks like.
A better Baltimore would look like quality education, so more qualified teachers, books in the classrooms, computer labs, and education that actually reflects the people that are in it.
I would love to see more community control. For example, if you have public housing in your community, let the community work with the community in redesigning that property if it's run down. Let the community work some of those jobs to rebuild those run-down properties.
For every march, it's getting bigger, it's getting louder. I see the movement growing. For years I've been saying it. Since I've been with United Workers, I've been seeing more and more organizations coming in and speaking about the bigger issues, the questions that the media don't ask. Like, what is the real underlining causes of all this madness? Why is there so much poverty? Why is the poverty so deep and so difficult to correct? And who should be responsible?
I don't just want a house, I want a community. I want a community when I step outside, there are gardens growing fresh vegetables, There are safe parks for the kids to play in. There are schools just you go by the school grounds and they're just so vibrant and happy, can't wait for the bell to ring to get in there.
Young people, I think, are outraged. I think that young people are really beginning to see the problems with the system and that they want change, and that many of them feel that they could be Michael Brown, they could be Freddie Gray.
You can make all the police act really nice, and that's not going to change the material conditions of people in Baltimore. It's a really important piece that police stop terrorizing communities. But this long work of correcting health disparities, correcting housing inequality, of correcting economic injustice, this moment right now, when the world is paying attention to Baltimore, we need to be focusing on these structural, systemic issues of economic violence against Black communities.
People can only take but so much. This is deliberate. This is deliberate.
You still matter. 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 We still matter. We still matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black men matter.
It's really tough to sit here and not remember the conversations with people, the relations, I've had with people here. My friends, associates, they're all gone. Most of whom I don't know where they are. There's a few that's still here in Baltimore and in this immediate community, but most has moved on to somewhere else. I don't know where they are. Baltimore, my Baltimore.